Good morning. We have with us this morning Mr. Andy Crawford, former CEO of Advanced Disposal Services. Thank you for being here, Andy.
Good morning.
What are the characteristics of a great leader?
I'm not sure that, one size fits all, but basically, I think a great leader is someone that that has an air of self-confidence, that they obviously believe in themselves, and other people buy into that. I think early on there are certain people that there's a level of trust that you have, and I think it's important that if you're going to lead people, that they trust where you're taking them, and so I think those are a couple of the characteristics that I would mention.
What are the greatest challenges you have faced as a leader?
Actually, probably the biggest issue you run into is getting people out of their comfort zone. That's really the thing that you face. Actually, there's probably more of a challenge on the other end. As you're leading, if you're doing things that are somewhat new and controversial, it's people, the senior management and people like that probably are the biggest deterrent to a leader accomplishing goals.
How did your engineering education prepare you for leadership?
Well, I think my degree in industrial engineering, I think probably more than anything else, it teaches you to have a strong will, a strong mind, to think analytically. I think that in many parts of life, not just leadership, I think that's an important attribute that I took with me with this degree that I have in industrial engineering. I always felt that I could deal with complex issues and think them through and help people understand.
What other methods of leadership development were important in your growth as a leader?
Well, I think outside of the workplace, which I spent a lot of my life in the workplace, I don't think I ever went without a job until I sold my last company. Never had to look for a job. They always looked for me. But, I think one thing that early on I may have had turned away from a little bit and found out later it was a valuable asset was doing things outside the workplace. Small example of that, didn't have time to do it, but I was convinced by a friend, even though I'm not a big fisherman, to come in and get involved in what was the largest kingfish tournament in the United States there in Jacksonville. And within the second year, I was the chairman of that, and I had 300 volunteers, which are different than having people in the workplace. And I started to feel comfortable with the press and with people from all different walks of life, and so I think getting out of the workplace, I think that's an important thing.
What advice would you give to students who want to become great leaders?
Kind of goes back to what I said earlier. You've got to be willing to get out of your comfort zone. You've got to be willing to understand, to not have a fear of failure. I think a real important thing if you're going to be a leader. You've got to be able to do things that are out of the ordinary, that you're not afraid to fail. As I developed my management teams, the big thing that was really, really important to me was that I didn't want people around me that straddled the fence. I wanted people that would do things that turned out to be important, and sometimes they failed. And if they weren't willing to fail, they didn't last very long in my organization. So,
what can universities do to support leadership development?
Probably what I've already seen a lot of the last couple of days, the last several years, is the things that you are doing. I see these graduating students that have done internships, that are out doing things outside of classwork. I think those are the important things. You get your academic stuff, and there's a very disciplined environment there. But I think the more that a student, or as you get out of college and move forward, the more that you're willing to reach outside of the classroom and the academia, I think the better you'll be at your leadership.
How has globalization impacted leadership?
Well, you know, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. I think that obviously I'm a student, I'm an investor and a student of what's going on around the world, and I know a lot about that. But all of my work experience has been in the service industry, so we've had no global opportunities. But having said that, I think everything you do every day, in some way today, there are global aspects to it, and obviously a new student getting out of school and to tell them where their career is going to lead them, I think that's going to be important to the multicultural world that we're in today, and totally, you know, every country in the world is in some way, you know, dependent on what happens to the others, and so I think it's important, but you know, whether you're directly involved with it or not, it depends on how your career path goes.
What key events or people were instrumental in putting you on the path to leadership?
Well, you know, there are a lot of them, but a couple, you know, kind of come to mind. Early on, when I was 26 years old, I was offered the opportunity to break out from the engineering work I'd been doing, and fairly quickly became the district manager of about 1,000 people in a 7-state. It was a big dairy company that a group had bought out in the southeast, and I was sent up by the CEO of the company to straighten it out. And most of the people that I worked with were much older than I was. Great group of folks, but demoralized because the facilities were old, the methodologies they were using were old, the management. And I succeeded someone that was more traditional, and I ended up having to totally create a new paradigm. We had to go out and I closed 8 old plants, modernized plants. At the end of the day, I had to learn how to work with unions. At the end of the day, the people that were there when I finally left, you know, I felt I'd left them in a lot better position. Their work conditions were better. It kind of surprised me at first that at the young age that I was at, that people followed me because they bought into my vision. They believed that their lives were going to be better at the end of the day, and they were. And you know, my going away party was all tears, and that probably had more to do. I also, at that point in time, my mentor was one of the group out of Philadelphia that bought out this waste company, and he realized early on that maybe I was the kind of guy that could do things, and but he was a very tough guy, and he taught me. I remember one board meeting that I was at. We were rebuilding all these plants, a lot of capital involved, and I was about halfway through the meeting, and I saw him with his head on his hands, looking at me, shaking his head. He was the chairman of this board. He stopped the meeting. He called me into the other room, and he just laid into me and said, "Quit making excuses. Go in there and tell them that you failed. Go in there and tell them that you're behind schedule, but then you tell them what you're going to do about it. They don't want to hear excuses about why you're out there spending all this money and you're not where you are." And I never forgot that. I never forgot that.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you.